Hello, I'm Lauren Carden. I'm a professor in the English department. I had the privilege of teaching Ellie Novotny in my English 300 class, which is an introduction to English studies. Ellie was a very active participant in this class. She showed kind of thoughtfulness and an empathy in terms of a lot of the material we read, but also in how she presented information to her class and participated in peer review workshops. One of the things that stands out most to me about Ellie and what makes her a good fit for this Tide Talk, I think, is her final project in which she looked at the novel Slaughterhouse-Five by Kurt Vonnegut through a psychoanalytic lens and focused on trauma theory, in particular the psychological toll that a trauma can take on a person's life or on their personality. So given these are some of Ellie's interests, I think her Tide Talk is an excellent fit for her. So please join me in welcoming Ellie to the stage. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Ellie Novotny, and I have a passion for education and a fundamental belief that every person deserves the freedom to pursue it. When I was in high school, I was involved in several organizations that combated international sex slavery, and that's what the issue was to me, international. Something that happened in Malawi, in the Dominican Republic, surely not in the United States, surely not in Tuscaloosa. So last semester, when I discovered that sex trafficking is, in fact, a huge problem going on in Tuscaloosa, I was shocked. I was horrified. How had I gone to this university for 2.5 years completely unaware of this? But the more I inquired and asked about this, it seemed like none of my fellow students or even faculty members were aware of this problem. This must change. We must not live in the bubble of our campus unaware of the atrocities that are occurring right outside in our very town. After all, we claim to be the land of the free and the home of the brave. Well, is this true? Human trafficking ought to concern every community because it tears at our social fabric. It ought to concern every individual because it's a debasement of our common humanity. It's an injustice, it's an outrage, and Barack Obama says that it must be called by its true name, modern slavery. It's evil, it's barbaric, and it has no place in a civilized society. Now, most of us would consider Tuscaloosa, the place that we all call home for at least 9 months out of the year, to be a civilized place. We live ignorant to the reality that Tuscaloosa is an absolute hotbed for human trafficking. It is our duty as students, as citizens, and as human beings to refuse to turn a blind eye to the horrifying reality that sex trafficking is occurring in our home. Tonight I'm going to tell you more about what sex trafficking is, about the intensity of the problem right here in Tuscaloosa, and about the steps that need to be taken to begin to combat this modern-day slavery. The Polaris Project defines sex trafficking as a form of modern slavery in which victims are coerced under threat of violence, sometimes being abducted, and forced to engage in commercial sex acts against their will. Sex trafficking is not a single-faceted issue. There are countless ways in which victims become entrapped. For models, actors, dancers, it's not uncommon for them to receive false job offers. They go in for an interview and are forced to commit sex acts against their will. On large highways in the United States, and especially in the South, people are trafficked almost every day at rest stops, at gas stations, at small supermarkets. Predators lure victims into secluded areas and abduct them, sometimes drugging them, and force them into sex trafficking rings. In areas of high poverty, like Tuscaloosa, it is not uncommon for families to force their own children into sex slavery to make ends meet. These are just 3 of the horrors that are occurring in the town that we all live in. 36,270 cases of human trafficking have been reported in all of the United States since 2007. Since 2017, 4,400 cases have been reported. That's 4,400 people living in slavery in what's supposed to be the land of the free. Now, we call ourselves the land of the free, but right now there are people crying themselves to sleep, trapped in a brothel, daring to imagine that someday they may be treated not as property, but as human beings. These people very well may have been abducted from our own backyards. The Southeast Sun confirms that I-20, the highway that runs from Tuscaloosa to Atlanta, is the #1 superhighway for sex trafficking in the United States. This is a road that many of us travel on often, going home to family, visiting friends, traveling completely unaware of the danger that lurks just outside of our cars. The Urban Institute estimates that the underground sex economy in Atlanta is valued at over $290 million. The men, women, and children that supply this horrid, booming economy come largely from people abducted along this highway that we travel so frequently. In Tuscaloosa in 2017, the month of July held 44 arrests for Tuscaloosa sex traffickers. More recently, this past February, 47 additional men were arrested in this town for sex trafficking. Court documents list dozens of arrests at the Ramada, at the Best Western, at hotels that we drive past on our weekly trip to Walmart, completely unknowing of the horrors that have occurred inside of these places we're driving past. The story of Adam Bailey has been widely underreported and covered up. A Tuscaloosa native of 24 years old, he discovered that his friend had become involved in an underground sex trafficking ring in Tuscaloosa. When he tried to intervene on behalf of a blindfolded, physically restrained woman, he was murdered, given a lethal dose of drugs, and left to die at DCH right down the road on August 14th, 2016. Adam Bailey's father is still trying to achieve justice for his son in a wrongful death lawsuit. Adam Bailey was brave enough to take a stand, and tragically, it cost him his life. How can we honor his legacy by refusing to be complacent to this atrocious practice? First, we need to do more to see it and spot it and stop it. Strengthening of training needs to be enforced for our law enforcement and investigators in the United States, but specifically in Tuscaloosa, so we can better educate our community that this is occurring right here. Our bus drivers and truck inspectors need to become educated as well, as victims are often transported through these methods. We need to start an initiative to educate our teachers and educators in this town so that they can be on the lookout for victims in their classes. This can help protect the most vulnerable among us, our young people. Now, we live in the age of the internet, and for sex trafficking, this is no different. Traffickers utilize countless ways online to find their victims, like backpage ads, Craigslist, and virused links. Tech companies and advocates have been developing ways and detection agents that can combat this. Parents in our community need to be aware that this software is accessible to people like you and me, so that they can keep their children safe online and on their smartphones. Last year, a wonderful thing happened for this school. The Department of Justice granted over $1 million to the University of Alabama Social Work Department to combat human trafficking. The work that they are going to do to advocate for victims is incredible. But sadly, the awareness on campus among students and faculty and our community that sex trafficking is even a problem here is still incredibly low. This is where you come in. Spread awareness to your fellow college students in groups that you're in communities that you're a part of. Go on the polarisproject.org website to learn more about sex trafficking, ways that you can personally combat it, and sign petitions and create laws in our community that will combat sex trafficking. We need to urge our lawmakers to pass the Visa Transparency Anti-Trafficking Act of 2018. In this country, hundreds of thousands of temporary workers enter this country legally every year. They often work for one employer who determines both their employment status as well as their legal status. This amount of power leaves these workers very vulnerable to become victims to sex trafficking. This bill is a bipartisan legislation that would require that basic information about guest worker programs, including employer, occupation, and wage rate of every guest worker in the nation, be collected by the various agencies involved in regulating these programs. It would make that data available to the public through a central database. This could prevent thousands of people from becoming entrapped in sex slavery every year, and yet it has almost no traction in the South. I urge you to call your lawmakers and make a difference. We must refuse to be complacent with the atrocity of human trafficking occurring anywhere, but especially in our home. We claim to be the land of the free and the home of the brave, so today I urge you to be the brave people that will help put an end to local sex trafficking. Educate yourselves, spread awareness, and take action. How can we live complacent and ignorant when our fellow human being lives enslaved right next to us? Today I told you about what sex trafficking is, about the intensity of the problem here in Tuscaloosa, and about things that need to be done to begin to combat it. Now, I outlined several initiatives for you, and I cannot do them all by myself. If you are interested in becoming further involved in combating sex trafficking in Tuscaloosa, I urge you to send me an email at this contact information right behind me. I beg you to join in on one of the greatest human rights causes of our lifetime. I beg you to be the brave that insist in fighting for the freedom of all. Thank you so much.